The cruelest thing my wife ever gave me for Christmas was not the divorce papers. It was the smile she wore when she thought I had no idea what she had already tried to steal. The snow started falling just after 6 that evening, soft and steady, covering the driveway of our house in Edina, Minnesota, like the world was trying to make everything look clean before it got ugly. Christmas lights blinked along the gutters. The wreath on the front door still smelled faintly of pine. Inside, the dining room looked like a catalog picture of a life people envy from the street. 2 crystal glasses. A roasted turkey Meredith had ordered from a catering company and pretended to cook. Silver candles burning low. A tree in the corner dressed in gold ribbon and white ornaments, each one catching the firelight like a tiny moon. I remember all of it because when your marriage ends, your mind turns into a camera. It records the useless details first. The napkin folded beside my plate. The red polish on her nails. The way her wedding ring flashed when she reached into her purse. My name is Nathan Whitaker. I was 46 years old that Christmas Eve, founder of Whitaker Cold Chain, a logistics company most people never noticed unless their medicine arrived cold, their groceries stayed fresh, or their hospital got supplies during a blizzard. I built my life around things that could not afford to fail. Refrigerated trucks, backup generators, payroll, contracts, promises. Marriage was supposed to be one of those things. Meredith sat across from me in a dark red dress, perfect hair falling over one shoulder, her face calm in that polished way she used whenever she had already decided what someone else deserved. She did not touch her food. She did not ask about the storm rolling in from the west or the drivers still fighting ice on I-94. She just placed a cream-colored envelope between us, right beside the gravy boat, and slid it across the table with 2 fingers. The paper made almost no sound. Somehow, it felt louder than thunder. I wanted to give myself freedom for Christmas, she said. Her voice was soft. That was the part that made it cold. Not angry, not shaking, soft, like she was discussing a spa appointment or a new set of curtains. I looked down at the envelope and saw my full legal name typed across the front, Nathaniel James Whitaker. After 18 years of marriage, she had used the name only bankers and attorneys used. Not Nate, not Honey, not the man who once drove 600 miles through a snowstorm because her mother had fallen on an icy porch in Des Moines. Just Nathaniel James Whitaker. I opened it slowly. Divorce petition. Property claim. Temporary restraining order on business distributions. Request for financial disclosures. Claim to marital interest in Whitaker Cold Chain Holdings. There it was. Not hidden. Not subtle. She wanted the house. The investment accounts. The lake cabin near Brainerd. And every share she believed I still held. Meredith watched my face the way a person watches ice crack on a frozen lake, waiting for the first panic. I gave her none. My father used to tell me, never build something a bitter person can take apart. I thought about that as I reached for the pen she had placed beside my plate. A heavy black fountain pen, probably chosen because it looked dramatic. She had rehearsed this. Maybe with Grant Holloway, her attorney. Maybe with Ryan Blake, the financial advisor who had been smiling too much at our Christmas gala the week before. Maybe alone in the mirror. I signed the acknowledgement page. One stroke, then another. My hand stayed steady. Meredith blinked once, and for the first time that night, satisfaction warmed her face. She thought that signature was surrender. She thought silence meant shock. She thought a man who did not raise his voice had already lost the room. I slid the papers back across the table and said, "Merry Christmas, Meredith." Her smile widened. Mine did not. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the tire tracks in the driveway. Inside, the candles burned lower. And between us sat the first document she understood, while 6 months earlier, another document had already moved every share she came for. Meredith picked up the signed papers as if she had just collected a trophy. She did not say thank you. People like Meredith never thank you for giving them what they think they deserve. She stacked the pages carefully, tapped the edges against the table, and slipped them back into the cream-colored envelope with a slow satisfaction that told me she had already imagined the next part. The phone in her lap lit up beneath the edge of the tablecloth. I saw the glow against the red fabric of her dress. She glanced down, typed with one hand, and tried to hide the smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. She thought I did not notice. I noticed everything that night. When a man finally stops begging to be loved, his eyes get sharper. Her message was short. I did not need to read every word. I saw enough in the reflection of the dark window beside us. He signed. It is done. The reply came almost instantly. Probably Grant Holloway. Grant was the kind of lawyer who wore cuff links to breakfast and spoke to waiters like they were temporary furniture. I had met him twice at charity events before he became my wife's hired weapon. He had a soft handshake, a perfect smile, and the confidence of a man who had never loaded a truck at 4 in the morning during a Minnesota whiteout. Meredith set the phone face down, but her shoulders changed. Lighter, looser, like she had been carrying a suitcase through an airport and finally handed it to someone else. I think it is best if we keep this civil, she said. Civil, that word sat between us like spoiled milk. I looked at the candles, the untouched turkey, the cranberry sauce in a silver bowl, and the tree glowing in the corner with ornaments we had collected from trips she barely remembered. Aspen, Charleston, Mackinac Island. Every little memory wrapped in gold thread, hanging there like proof that beautiful things can still be hollow. Civil sounds good, I said. My voice was calm enough to bother her. I could see it. A tiny wrinkle formed between her brows. She wanted pain, not because she loved me, but because pain would confirm power. If I shouted, she could call me unstable. If I begged, she could call me pathetic. If I accused, she could call me cruel. So I gave her nothing to hold. Just quiet. Just breath. Just the sound of snow brushing the windows while the house settled around us. She cleared her throat and began explaining the terms as if she were reading the weather report. The house should be sold or awarded to her. The lake cabin had emotional value to her, though she had complained about the mosquitoes every summer for 15 years. The investment accounts needed to be divided fairly, and by fairly, she meant generously. Then she said the company name with careful softness, Whitaker Cold Chain, as if saying it gently made the demand less hungry. She believed she had helped build my public image. She believed spouses shared everything. She believed 18 years entitled her to the founder shares, the voting rights, the future dividends, the board influence, the control. I nodded once and stood up. I will clear the glasses, I said. That stopped her. Not because of what I said, but because of what I did not say. I carried both wine glasses into the kitchen, poured the untouched wine down the sink, and washed them by hand. Warm water ran over crystal. Outside, the storm thickened. In the reflection above the sink, I saw her watching me from the dining room, confused now. A man who has lost everything does not usually rinse glasses. A man who has been cornered does not usually fold the dish towel. But I was not cornered. I was remembering another table 6 months earlier in a downtown Minneapolis law office, where Evelyn Carter had pushed a blue folder toward me and said, Nathan, once this is signed, she can still fight for money, but she cannot take control. I had signed that day too. Same steady hand. Different paper. Meredith saw tonight's signature. She never saw the one that mattered. Long before Meredith learned how to say the word equity with that polished little smile, I learned what cold really meant. Not the kind of cold people complain about while walking from a heated garage to a warm restaurant. Real cold. The kind that crawls through leather gloves, settles into your knuckles, and makes every breath feel like you are swallowing broken glass. I was 28 when I took my first night shift at North Star Frozen Storage outside Minneapolis. Midnight to 8 in the morning, $12.75 an hour. Steel-toed boots, thermal coveralls, and a time clock that did not care if you were tired. The building was a giant white box under gray winter skies, humming day and night like some frozen animal that never slept. Inside, the freezer bay sat at -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and every pallet had to move on schedule because grocery stores did not care about excuses, hospitals did not care about bad roads, and families did not care that the man loading their food could not feel his fingers. I learned fast. You keep moving or the cold wins. You check the seal twice or the shipment spoils. You do not complain, because complaining does not warm a loading dock. My father, Charles Whitaker, understood that better than anyone. He had run a small refrigerated delivery route for 23 years out of a 2-bay garage with a cracked concrete floor and a coffee maker that sounded like it was giving up every morning. He was not a rich man. He was not even close. But he had a way of standing in a room that made people straighten themselves. He believed a handshake was a contract, a truck was a promise, and payroll was sacred. When I was a kid, I used to ride beside him before sunrise, half asleep in the passenger seat, watching his breath fog the windshield while he drove county roads with one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around a gas station coffee. He would point at the rearview mirror and say, "Nate, what is behind you matters, but it cannot drive the truck." I did not understand it then. I did later. After his heart gave out in the winter of 2006, I found his ledger in the garage office, tucked under a stack of fuel receipts. Not a spreadsheet, not software. A blue notebook with every route, every customer, every payment, every debt written in pencil. The numbers were not pretty. 2 trucks behind on maintenance. A line of credit almost maxed out. 3 customers late on invoices. My mother wanted me to sell what was left and find stable work. She was not wrong. Stability has a sweet sound when grief has emptied the house. But I kept hearing my father's voice every time I walked past that cold garage. A truck is a promise. So I kept the routes. I worked nights at North Star, then drove our old refrigerated box truck during the day. I slept in pieces. 90 minutes here, 2 hours there. I ate sandwiches wrapped in wax paper while diesel fumes drifted through the cracked window. I learned insurance, fuel contracts, cold chain compliance, Department of Transportation rules, warehouse leases, and how to smile at bankers who looked at my worn boots before they looked at my business plan. That was how Whitaker Cold Chain started. Not in a boardroom. Not with investors clapping around a polished table. It started with a dead father's ledger, a tired son, and one truck that needed to make it through another Minnesota winter. Every share Meredith wanted that Christmas had been built from those miles. Every signature she thought she could corner had a history beneath it. She saw stock certificates. I saw frost on my gloves, my father's pencil marks, and the mornings I wondered if my heart could keep running on coffee and stubbornness. By the time I met her, I had already learned the first rule of survival. Build slowly, build clean, and never let someone who loves the shine more than the work hold the keys to what keeps people alive. Meredith did not hate me when I was poor. That would have been simpler. In the beginning, she admired the grind, or at least she admired the version of it that sounded romantic over dinner. We met at a fundraiser in downtown Minneapolis, back when Whitaker Cold Chain was still 3 trucks, 1 leased warehouse, and a checking account that made my stomach tighten every Friday morning. She was working in marketing for a regional healthcare group, wearing a navy dress and laughing with the kind of confidence that made every man in the room glance twice. I had come straight from a warehouse inspection, changed my shirt in the cab of my pickup, and still had a faint line of grease near my wrist that soap had missed. She noticed it. Instead of looking embarrassed for me, she smiled and asked if I was one of the men who actually kept the city running. That was the first thing she ever said to me. I should have remembered it better later, not because it was sweet, but because it showed me what she loved most. Not me, the usefulness of me. For the first few years, she packed sandwiches when I had early routes. She brought coffee to the warehouse on Saturdays and charmed the dispatchers by remembering their kids' names. She stood beside me when a bank turned down our expansion loan and squeezed my hand under the table so hard my fingers hurt. Back then, I thought we were building the same life. 2 hands on the same rope, pulling in the same direction. When the company grew from 3 trucks to 12, she helped redesign the logo. When we landed our first hospital system contract, she cried in the parking lot and said my father would have been proud. I believed her. A man wants to believe the woman beside him sees the sweat, not just the shine. Then the shine got brighter. The first article came out in the Star Tribune, a small business feature with my picture beside one of our refrigerated trailers. Meredith framed it before I even got home. The second article mentioned her by name, calling her a driving force behind the company's public image. She read that sentence 3 times at breakfast. I remember the spoon pausing halfway to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the paper like she had just found a door with her name on it. After that, something shifted. She stopped visiting the warehouse unless there were cameras. She stopped asking whether the night drivers had safe roads and started asking whether the company should sponsor bigger events. She traded practical coats for designer ones and began saying words like visibility, positioning, and executive presence as if they mattered more than maintenance schedules or driver retention. I did not mind her wanting nice things. She had earned comfort. We both had. But comfort was not enough for Meredith. She wanted applause. She wanted rooms to turn when she entered. She wanted my work to become her stage. At first, the comments came wrapped in jokes. You cannot wear that old sport coat forever, Nate. Then, you need to stop talking like a warehouse manager when donors are in the room. Then, One night after a charity dinner, while snowmelt dripped from my boots onto the mudroom tile, she looked at me and said, "Sometimes you are still just a freezer rat with a bank account." She laughed after she said it, like laughter could soften the blade. I smiled because that is what men do when they are not ready to admit the woman they married has started measuring them in public value. But the words stayed. They followed me into board meetings. They sat beside me in the truck. They echoed in the warehouse when I shook hands with men working the same night shifts that raised me. She thought she was insulting where I came from. She did not understand she was insulting the only part of me that had never lied. The charity gala happened 8 days before the envelope landed on our Christmas table, and looking back, that night was not the beginning of the end. It was the night Meredith got careless enough to let me see the ending she had already written. The event was held at the Lakeside Club downtown, one of those old Minneapolis buildings with marble floors, brass railings, and windows tall enough to make the skyline look like it belonged to whoever could afford the room. Outside, the sidewalks were glazed with ice. Inside, everything glowed. White tablecloths, evergreen garlands, gold ornaments hanging from the chandeliers. A string quartet playing Christmas songs softly enough that rich people could still hear themselves talk. Whitaker Cold Chain had sponsored the fundraiser for the Children's Hospital for 6 years, and every year I came because the work mattered. Meredith came because the cameras did. She stood near the front of the ballroom in a silver dress, holding a glass of sparkling water, laughing beside Ryan Blake like they were the hosts, and I was a guest who had wandered in through the service entrance. Ryan was polished in the way men get polished when they make their living moving other people's money around. Perfect haircut, perfect teeth, navy tuxedo, a watch that cost more than my first delivery truck. He had been around more often that year, always introduced as a financial advisor, always smiling like he knew the punchline before anyone else heard the joke. I was across the room talking with Marlene Ortiz, our night dispatch supervisor, about a driver stuck near Duluth with a reefer unit throwing a temperature warning. That was the part of the company nobody clapped for. Not the speeches, not the donation checks. The quiet calls at 9:30 at night when one bad sensor could ruin a hospital shipment. I excused myself and crossed the room to find Meredith, still half listening to Marlene through the phone pressed to my ear. That was when I heard my wife say, clear enough for the circle around her to laugh, "Nathan builds trucks." I built the image. The laughter was not loud. That almost made it worse. It was polite, expensive laughter, the kind people use when they want cruelty to sound clever. Ryan lifted his glass and added, "Let us be honest, without Meredith, Whitaker would still be a man in a warehouse arguing with a freezer door." More laughter. A woman in pearls covered her mouth. A hospital board member looked down into his drink. Meredith did not correct him. She smiled. Not embarrassed. Not surprised. Proud. I stood 6 feet away, close enough to smell pine from the garland and the sharp citrus in her perfume. For a second, the ballroom narrowed until all I could see was her face under the golden lights. 18 years. 300 payroll Fridays. Winter storms. Bank meetings. My father's ledger. Men and women in steel-toed boots, depending on me to make the right call before sunrise. And there she was, turning all of it into a joke small enough to fit inside a champagne circle. Marlene's voice crackled through my phone. "Boss, are you still there?" I looked at Meredith. She finally saw me. Her smile paused, just a fraction, then returned brighter than before. That was the second cut. Not the joke. The recovery. She wanted me to absorb it quietly so the room could keep liking her. I did. I did not raise my voice. I did not embarrass her. I did not give Ryan the satisfaction of watching me defend the dignity of work to a man whose hands had never carried a frozen pallet at 2 in the morning. I simply turned away and answered Marlene. Switch him to backup power, route him through St. Cloud, and have maintenance meet him at Bay 4. My voice was steady, steel steady. Behind me, the laughter thinned. People can feel when a man chooses silence instead of weakness. They just do not always understand the difference. On the drive home, Meredith complained that I had been cold to important donors. I watched snow streak across the windshield and said nothing. She thought my silence was shame. It was not. It was calculation. Because that night, while she sat beside me checking her reflection in the dark window, I finally understood something my father had tried to teach me years before. You do not argue with someone holding decorations when you still own the foundation beneath the building. The week after the gala, I stopped looking for proof that Meredith still respected me and started looking at facts. Respect leaves traces. So does betrayal. Not always in dramatic ways. Sometimes it is a calendar entry with no title. A lunch reservation 2 neighborhoods away from her office. A bank statement downloaded at midnight. A question asked too casually over coffee. How many voting shares are there again? She had said one morning, stirring her latte without looking up. I can never remember how that structure works. I remember the spoon circling the mug. Slow. Careful. Too careful. Meredith had spent 18 years avoiding the boring parts of my company. She did not care about refrigerated trailer leases, driver shortage projections, fuel hedging, insurance renewals, or Department of Transportation audits. But suddenly, she cared about valuation dates, founder equity, minority discounts, restricted stock, and whether a spouse could claim appreciation on shares acquired before marriage. Those are not questions a wife asks because she is curious. Those are questions someone teaches her to ask. I did not confront her. Confrontation is emotional spending, and I had already wasted enough. Instead, I did what my father would have done with a truck making a strange sound. I checked the system. Quietly. Methodically. One piece at a time. The first real confirmation came in June, 6 months before that Christmas dinner. I was leaving a supplier meeting near Wyzetta when I saw Meredith through the front window of a restaurant called Harlan's. She was seated at a corner table with Ryan Blake and Grant Holloway. Grant had a legal pad open. Ryan had a laptop turned toward her. Meredith was leaning forward, listening with the same focused expression she used to reserve for doctors, donors, and photographers. I did not go inside. I stood under the awning while rain tapped the sidewalk and watched my marriage become a strategy session. There is a strange mercy in seeing the truth before it sees you. It hurts, but it also clears the room. That night, I came home before she did. I grilled chicken in the backyard, set the table, asked about her day, and listened while she told me she had been buried in marketing meetings. She kissed my cheek like habit. I smiled like I believed her. That was the night I called Evelyn Carter. Evelyn had handled our corporate structuring for years, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair, sharp glasses, and the calm voice of someone who had watched powerful men panic over simple paperwork. Her office overlooked downtown Minneapolis, 27 floors up, all glass, gray carpet, and silence that cost money. I sat across from her the next morning with a folder of old shareholder documents, trust drafts, board minutes, and the blue ledger my father left behind. Evelyn did not dramatize anything. She read. She underlined. She asked precise questions. When I told her what I had seen at Harlan's, she leaned back and removed her glasses. Nathan, she said, there is a difference between protecting an asset and hiding one. We are going to stay on the right side of that line. That sentence mattered. I was not trying to cheat anyone. I was not trying to make money vanish or punish Meredith for wanting out. If the marriage was over, the marriage was over. But Whitaker Cold Chain was not a bracelet, not a cabin, not a vacation account. It was a living machine with 214 employees, 63 trucks, hospital contracts across 4 states, and families who depended on every payroll run clearing on Friday. I could survive a divorce. The company could not survive becoming leverage in Meredith's performance. Evelyn opened a blue folder and slid a document toward me. Your father was smarter than you. Think, she said. Years earlier, before Whitaker became anything worth fighting over, Charles had pushed me to draft a family continuity plan. I had treated it like one more boring formality. Buy-sell restrictions, transfer provisions, trust language, voting control, founder protection, all those dull words nobody applauds at galas. Now they sat on the table like a row of locked doors. Evelyn tapped the first page with her pen. If we update this correctly, with board approval, proper valuation, full records, and no concealment, she can still make a claim for marital value. But she cannot take the wheel. I looked out at the city, at the gray summer clouds hanging over the Mississippi River, and felt something inside me settle. Not happiness. Not revenge. Clarity. Meredith wanted a fight built from emotion. I was going to answer with documents. By the end of June, the paper trail had begun to look less like defense and more like architecture. That is the thing people like Meredith never understood about business. The part everyone sees is the sign on the building, the catered events, the clean logo on a refrigerated trailer rolling down the interstate. The part that actually holds everything together is buried in language so dull most people quit reading before the second page. Transfer restrictions, voting agreements, continuity provisions, independent valuation, board consent, trust certification. Boring words, beautiful words, words that do not cry, do not panic, and do not forget what they were built to protect. Evelyn moved slowly on purpose. Every step had to be clean enough to survive fluorescent lights, opposing counsel, and a judge with no patience for games. We ordered a third-party valuation. We notified the board. We reviewed the original shareholder agreement my father had insisted on back when the company owned more debt than equipment. We documented dates, signatures, minutes, consideration, and every reason the restructuring served the business beyond my marriage falling apart. That mattered. I did not want a trick. Tricks collapse when smart people ask simple questions. I wanted a structure. A structure stands. The founder shares were not dumped into a drawer or pushed through some back hallway deal. They were transferred according to the same rules Charles had put in place before Meredith ever cared what a voting right was. The Whitaker Family Continuity Trust already existed. It had been sitting quietly for years, like an old fire door nobody notices until smoke fills the hall. Its purpose was simple: protect control of the company from death, disability, creditor chaos, or any personal crisis that could put hospital contracts and employee paychecks at risk. Divorce was not written in big emotional letters, but Evelyn showed me where it lived between the lines. Personal crisis, change in ownership threat, control disruption. I remember signing the updated transfer documents on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Evelyn placed small colored tabs beside each signature line. Blue for trust assignment, yellow for board acknowledgement, pink for voting control confirmation. The pages smelled like toner and expensive paper. Outside her office window, downtown Minneapolis blurred behind rain, all steel and glass and brake lights. My hand did not shake, not because I felt nothing, but because the feeling had become too heavy to tremble. Grief has weight, so does clarity. When I finished, Evelyn gathered the pages and said, "From this point forward, she can argue value. She cannot argue control." I nodded, but what I heard was my father's voice in that cold garage years ago. Never build something a bitter person can take apart. The strange part was going home afterward. Meredith was in the kitchen, barefoot on the heated tile, scrolling through her phone while a cooking show played on the wall-mounted television. She looked up and asked why I was late. I told her I had a board matter downtown. It was true. Truth, I was learning, could be sharper than any lie when you used only the part someone deserved. She barely listened. She had entered the phase where she thought victory was already scheduled. Her questions got bolder after that. She asked whether the company might sell within 5 years. She asked if I had ever considered stepping back as chief executive officer. She asked what would happen to the shares if something happened to me. That one made me set down my coffee. Not dramatically, just carefully. Porcelain against granite. A small sound in a quiet kitchen. "The company keeps running," I said. She smiled like I had missed her point. I had not. For months, I lived in 2 marriages. The one she performed in public, with holiday cards and charity photographs, and her hand resting on my arm when donors looked over. And the one underneath, where she counted what she thought I owned while I counted what she could no longer touch. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no grand confession in the rain. Just paperwork moving through proper channels while Meredith ordered new furniture for a future she had already decorated without me. By December, the trust held the voting shares. The transfer had board approval. The records were complete. The company was safe. And Meredith, still sleeping under my roof, still wearing my last name, still smiling at photographers beside our Christmas tree, had no idea she was admiring a kingdom whose keys had already been moved from her reach. The first mediation session was scheduled for the second Tuesday in January, when Minneapolis looked like it had been carved out of gray ice. The streets were narrowed by snowbanks, the sky hung low over the buildings, and the wind moved between the downtown towers with a sound like paper tearing. Meredith arrived 10 minutes late in a camel coat, black gloves, and the kind of calm smile people wear when they believe the hard part is already over. Grant Holloway walked beside her carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first month of rent. Ryan Blake was not there, but his fingerprints were. I could feel them in the numbers, in the demands, in the confidence sitting across the conference table from me. Evelyn Carter sat to my right, silver hair pinned back, blue folder closed in front of her, hands folded like we were waiting for a train instead of watching the final act of someone else's plan. The mediator, a retired judge named Paul Serrano, explained the process in a tired voice. Property division, disclosure, good faith negotiation, efficient resolution. Meredith nodded, at every phrase like a student who had studied for the exam. When Grant finally opened his briefcase, he did it with ceremony. Out came spreadsheets, asset summaries, valuation projections, and a proposed settlement thick enough to stop a door. He slid copies across the table and began speaking in that smooth courtroom rhythm men use when they want greed to sound reasonable. Meredith was seeking the Edina house, the lake cabin, 50% of marital investment accounts, spousal maintenance for a transitional period, and a direct ownership interest in Whitaker Cold Chain Holdings, reflecting what he called her substantial contribution to brand development and executive positioning. Executive positioning. I almost admired the phrase. It turned gala smiles and donor introductions into something that sounded like machinery. Then Grant said the sentence she had been waiting months to hear. Mrs. Whitaker is prepared to accept either a 50% equity transfer of Mr. Whitaker's founder shares or a structured buyout based on the current controlling interest valuation. Meredith looked at me then. Not at Evelyn. Not at the mediator. At me. Her eyes were bright, careful, hungry. She expected anger. Maybe fear. Maybe that old husband version of me who would try to explain the cost of night routes and hospital contracts to people who measured work in applause. I picked up the settlement packet, turned one page, then another. The paper felt warm from the printer. The room smelled like coffee, wool coats, and legal ambition. I set it down and said nothing. Silence changed the temperature first. Grant adjusted his cuff. Meredith shifted in her chair. The mediator glanced toward Evelyn. That was when she opened the blue folder. Not quickly, not dramatically, just one clean motion. She removed a stapled packet, then another, then a certified copy with a raised seal pressed into the corner. Each document landed on the table with a soft, final sound. Trust certificate, board resolution, share transfer record, updated shareholder agreement, voting control confirmation, independent valuation letter. Grant's smile held for 3 seconds. Then his eyes began to move faster. Line 1. Date. Signature. Exhibit A. Board approval. Trust assignment. His face did not collapse all at once. It emptied in stages. Meredith leaned toward him, whispering, "What is that?" No one answered immediately. That was the mercy of the moment. The truth was allowed to breathe before it cut. Evelyn slid the certified trust certificate to the center of the table. The controlling founder shares are not available for transfer, she said. They are held by the Whitaker Family Continuity Trust under documents executed in June, approved by the board, valued independently, and disclosed in accordance with corporate requirements. Mrs. Whitaker may pursue whatever marital valuation argument she believes is appropriate, but she cannot obtain voting control, board authority, or direct ownership of those shares. Grant flipped another page, then another. His pen stopped moving. Meredith's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For the first time since Christmas Eve, she looked at me without performance. Not wife to husband, not strategist to target. Just a woman realizing the room she thought she owned had a locked door behind every wall. "You moved them," she said. Her voice was small enough to surprise me. I looked at the documents, then back at her. "No," I said. "I protected what was never yours to run." The mediator cleared his throat and reached for the packet. Grant stared at the seal like it had personally betrayed him. Meredith blinked hard, fighting for the version of herself that had walked into the room certain she was about to collect a company with my last name on it. But paper does not care about certainty. Dates do not care about confidence. Signatures do not care who smiled at the gala. 6 months earlier, while she was learning how to take the wheel, I had already made sure the engine could not be handed over to someone who only loved the shine. The room did not explode after that. Real endings rarely do. They settle. They sink into the carpet, into the stale coffee, into the space between people who suddenly understand they have been standing on different floors of the same building. Meredith sat very still while Grant asked for a recess. His voice had lost that polished edge. The mediator agreed, and for 15 minutes we occupied separate corners of the same office suite, like travelers delayed by weather. Meredith stood near the window, looking down at the frozen traffic on South 6th Street, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other wrapped around her phone. I wondered if she wanted to call Ryan. I wondered if Ryan would answer. Men like that enjoy the planning table more than the cleanup. Evelyn stayed beside me and said nothing. That was one of the things I respected about her. She never filled silence just because it was available. When we returned to the conference table, the demands changed. They always do when fantasy meets documentation. The house became negotiable. The lake cabin became less emotionally important. The founder shares disappeared from Grant's sentences like they had never existed. Meredith kept staring at the blue folder. Not at me, at the folder. That hurt more than I expected, because somewhere under the anger and the paperwork, a foolish part of me still wanted to believe she had come for the marriage before she came for the company. But grief has a way of correcting a man gently at first, then all at once. She had not cried on Christmas Eve when she handed me divorce papers beside a tree we decorated together. She had not cried at the gala when Ryan made my life's work sound like a punchline. She had not cried when Grant asked for control of the company my father had died trying to keep alive. Her eyes only filled when she realized the shares were gone from her reach. That tells you what someone was really holding. The final settlement took weeks, not minutes. That is another truth people leave out. Justice is not always a lightning strike. Sometimes it is email chains, revised drafts, disclosure schedules, and signatures scanned at 11 at night. Meredith received money. More than enough to live comfortably. I did not try to ruin her. Ruin is a young man's fantasy. I was not young anymore, and I had employees who needed me clear-headed. She moved into a condominium near Lake Harriet with underground parking and floor-to-ceiling windows. The Edina house sold in March, when the snow was turning gray at the edges and the yard looked tired from winter. I walked through it alone the night before closing. Empty rooms have a sound, a hollow kind of breathing. The dining room was bare. No candles, no tree, no cream-colored envelope beside the gravy boat. Just rectangles on the wall where pictures used to hang and pale marks on the hardwood where furniture had rested for years. I stood in the kitchen and washed one glass, even though it was already clean. Habit is strange that way. It gives your hands something to do when the heart is packing boxes. My phone buzzed before I turned off the lights. It was Marlene from dispatch. A vaccine shipment had been delayed outside Fargo because of freezing rain, and one of our backup trailers needed authorization for a route change. I looked around the house one last time, then answered her. Send the backup through Sioux Falls. Keep the temperature logs running, and call me if the readings drift more than 2 degrees. My voice sounded like mine again. Not happy. Not broken. Mine. 6 months later, Whitaker Cold Chain opened a new regional hub outside Des Moines. I invited every employee's family to the ribbon cutting. No gala. No string quartet. No photographers arranged by Meredith. Just barbecue, coffee, folding chairs, kids running between parked trucks, and drivers laughing with mechanics under a wide Iowa sky. My mother came in her Navy coat and stood beside me when I unlocked the front door. She touched the company's sign, then whispered, "Your father would have liked this." That was the first time I almost lost my composure. Not in court. Not at mediation. Not when Meredith walked away with a settlement check and a face full of disbelief. It was there, in front of a warehouse that smelled like new concrete and diesel, because I finally understood what I had saved. Not money. Not pride. Continuity. The promise that work could outlive betrayal if you built it clean enough. Meredith sent one message the following Christmas. Just 3 words. I miss us. I stared at it for a long time while snow tapped against the window of my smaller house, the one with no grand staircase, no designer, dining room, and no silence pretending to be peace. Then I deleted it. Some doors do not need to slam. They only need to stay closed. That year, I spent Christmas morning drinking coffee from my father's old thermos while the sunrise turned the snow pink over the driveway. The house was quiet, but not empty. There is a difference. I had lost a wife, a mansion, and the illusion that loyalty can make someone grateful. But I kept the company. I kept the people who depended on it. I kept the part of myself she used to laugh at because she never understood it was the strongest part. Some men lose everything because they panic when betrayal walks in wearing a pretty dress and holding legal papers. I kept quiet. I read the room. I signed what needed signing. And when the dust settled, the woman who wanted every share learned a lesson my father had written into me years before. You can decorate a life you did not build, but you do not get to own the foundation.